Welcome to the Facilitators Deep Dive Podcast, your podcast on your way to facilitation mastery.
Welcome to the deep dive. Looks like you've been digging deep into this whole world of Scrum and Agile. Lots of stuff on Joe Justice's book, Scrum Master, the Agile Training Seminar for Business Performance.
Yeah, he seems pretty fired up about how important speed is.
I mean, comparing it to like race cars and fighter jets, that's pretty bold.
It is, right? Kind of makes you wonder how he ties all that together.
Right. So we've got a lot to cover, huh? We've got the book itself, what a Scrum Master actually does, and all these like real world examples he uses from companies like Tesla, Toyota, Boeing, even SAP.
Those examples are what really grab you, don't they? But I think what will be even more useful for you is seeing how those core principles can, be used in like any industry or project,
Okay, so let's start with the basics then. What exactly is Scrum, and why is this idea of speed so essential to it?
Scrum. It's basically a framework for like managing work, but it's way more dynamic than your typical project management stuff. It's all about flexibility, collaboration and making progress, like step by step. And yeah, it's all geared towards being as fast and efficient as possible.
So it's not just about working fast, it's about working smart and being able to adapt quickly.
Yeah, exactly. Justice is saying that speed is what lets you respond to changes in the market.
Yeah.
Like what customers want, or even like new technology. It gives you an edge,
I can see how that'd be crucial in today's world, yeah. But doesn't that constant pressure to move quickly kind of risk burning people out or sacrificing quality?
That's a good point, yeah. And Justice, he knows that, those potential downsides. That's why he's big on this idea of balance, like making sure you have practices that prioritize how happy the team is and their well-being alongside all the speed stuff. It's about sustainable velocity, right? Not just burning everyone out.
Okay, that makes sense. So not just pushing everyone to their limits, but making sure the environment helps them do their best work.
Precisely. He even uses this kind of interesting analogy, like a convenience store compared to a Japanese onsen, to show how speed can be applied in different ways, to get different results.
A convenience store and an onsen. That's a pretty unexpected comparison.
Think about it. In a convenience store, speed is all about quick transactions, right? Getting people in and out, grabbing what they need. The goal is to make that whole flow of people and products as smooth as possible.
Okay, I'm starting to get it. But an onsen is all about relaxing, taking things slow. Where does speed even fit into that?
Even in a place like that, focus on tranquility and all, there are times when speed is really important. Imagine like a spill or something that needs fixing right away to keep that peaceful vibe going. Speed there isn't about rushing. It's about getting things back in order, making sure everything's smooth for the guests.
So it's understanding the situation and using speed strategically to get what you want.
Exactly. And that's one of the main things I hope you'll take away from this deep dive. Speed isn't just going fast. It's about being adaptable, responsive, efficient in a way that, fits with your goals.
Okay, yeah. I'm seeing how this strategic speed idea could work in all sorts of businesses and projects. But let's get into some of those real world examples Justice talks about. He mentions Tesla's crazy fast innovation cycle, right?
He does. He describes how, Tesla, using Scrum, managed to make a whopping 27 changes to the Model S sedan in just 1 week. Think about that. 27 changes to a real physical product, not just software updates or whatever.
Wow, that's incredible. How do they do that?
A bunch of things, really. They have this flat organizational structure, which means teams can make decisions fast. There's a culture that's open to trying new things and iterating, and they really understand how to use Scrum principles.
Interesting. But how does that compare to a company like Toyota? They're known for their attention to detail and continuous improvement. Seems like they'd be way slower.
True, yeah. Toyota's way has always been more deliberate, They focus on things lasting a long time and refining things. But here's the interesting thing. Even Toyota is starting to use Scrum now in some areas. They want to speed up their innovation and make their employees happier.
So even those companies with their traditional ways are seeing the value in being more agile.
Exactly. It shows how adaptable Scrum is. It can be tailored to different company cultures and what they want to achieve.
And what about that SAB Gripen fighter jet example? That one really caught my eye. Building a fighter jet in 3-week sprints sounds almost impossible.
Right. But that's exactly what SAP Aeronautics is doing. They've woven Scrum into their whole development process. They break down these complex tasks into smaller, manageable chunks. Those chunks can be finished in short bursts. They even do test flights after each sprint just to get immediate feedback so they can make adjustments.
Wow, that's taking Agile to a whole other level. I'm starting to see that these examples aren't just about being fast for no reason. It's about being so responsive, so adaptable, that you can stay ahead of the curve.
You got it. These examples also show how important it is to make things modular.
Yeah.
Break down these big, complicated systems into smaller parts that can be worked on and tested at the same time.
So like building with Lego blocks, you can swap out or upgrade parts without having to, redo the whole thing.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Modularity gives you more flexibility, more speed, more efficiency.
Okay, we've talked about Tesla, Toyota, and Aspapi. Now let's talk about Joe Justice's own company, Wikispeed. They're building street-legal cars in 1-week sprints using this extreme manufacturing thing. Sounds intense.
It is. Wikispeed is pushing the limits of what's possible when it comes to prototyping and production. They've got this system that emphasizes collaboration, always getting better, and like a laser focus on cutting out waste. They even have these build parties where they get engineers, executives, even volunteers together to build a car from nothing, all in one day.
A car in a day. That's like a team-building exercise on steroids. What can we learn from that kind of extreme approach?
Wikispeed shows us that even these super complicated projects can be broken down into smaller steps that can be done quickly when everyone's on the same page, when there's a culture of helping each other out and people are committed to learning and improving all the time.
Seems like there's a strong element of, team spirit and a shared goal that helps them succeed.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Justice is big on creating a positive work environment, where people feel valued, respected, and like they can actually make decisions. He thinks happy teams are more productive and come up with better ideas.
Yeah, that makes sense. When people feel good about their work and the folks they work with, they'll probably go the extra mile, come up with creative solutions.
Exactly. And that's where this idea of a happiness metric retrospective comes in. It's a technique Justice uses to figure out how the team is feeling and then improve it. He sees that as like a key factor in getting things done quickly.
Okay, we'll have to dive into that happiness metric a little deeper later. But first, let's break down some of the main things that make Scrum actually work. This 3-5-3 structure seems pretty central to it all.
It is, yeah. The 3-5-3 refers to like the 3 main roles, 5 events, and 3 artifacts that make up the foundation of Scrum.
Okay, let's start with the roles then. Who are these key players on a Scrum team?
You've got the product owner. They're in charge of like the big picture for the product, and they decide which features are most important. Then you have the Scrum Master, who's kind of like a coach, making sure the team is doing Scrum right and, helping them overcome any obstacles. And then there's the development team, the folks who actually build the product.
Okay, so you've got the visionaries, the coaches, and the builders. What about those events? How does work actually get done,
The 5 events give Scrum a structure, a rhythm. You've got the sprint, which is a set amount of time for work, usually like 2 to 4 weeks. Then there's sprint planning, where the team figures out what they'll be working on during that sprint. The daily Scrum is a short meeting every day where everyone checks in, sees how things are going, and figures out if there are any roadblocks. Then there's the sprint review, where the team shows what they've done to, the stakeholders. And finally, you have the sprint retrospective, where everyone looks back at how they did things and figures out how to do better next time.
So it's like this continuous cycle, planning, doing, reviewing, improving.
Yeah, precisely. Each event has a specific purpose, making sure the team is moving forward in a way that actually works, efficiently.
Okay, starting to see how this structure makes it easier to be agile and constantly improve. But how do you figure out how much work can actually be done in a sprint? I mean, actually estimate it.
Now, that's where things get interesting. Justice talks about this concept called yesterday's weather for estimating velocity.
Yesterday's weather. Sounds more like a weather forecast than a project management technique.
It's a good analogy, though, right? The idea is that how much you can get done in the next sprint, like the actual amount of work, will probably be similar to the average of like the last 3 sprints.
So you're using past data to predict how things will go in the future.
Exactly. The idea is that how you've done before is a good indicator of how you'll do in the future, especially when you have the same team and the work environment is pretty stable.
But what about those, unpredictable things that can mess things up?
That's where Scrum's flexibility comes in. The daily Scrum meetings let the team deal with those unexpected issues and, change their plans if they need to. And the sprint retrospective gives them a chance to learn from those situations and make adjustments for the next sprint.
So it's about being proactive, responsive, not just sticking to a plan that might not work anymore.
Exactly. And Justice also has this other way of estimating called justice estimation. It uses human intuition and the Fibonacci sequence to be more accurate than those traditional time-based estimations.
Fibonacci sequence. Now we're getting into some serious math here.
It's not as bad as it sounds. Instead of trying to put an exact number of hours on a task, you compare how complex or difficult it is to other projects that are already done.
Yeah.
Then you give it a Fibonacci number like 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, and so on.
So basically you're sizing up tasks relative to each other, not trying to pin them down to a specific time. That probably is more accurate when you're dealing with complex projects with lots of, unknowns.
Exactly. It uses our natural ability to compare things,
Yeah.
which is often more reliable than trying to predict the future.
It's a cool concept. I can see how that would be helpful, especially when the traditional ways of estimating just don't cut it.
And it speaks to a bigger thing about Scrum. It's about accepting that you don't know everything and finding ways to work well even when things are ambiguous.
So not about controlling every little thing, but accepting there will be surprises and, building in ways to adapt.
Exactly. That ability to adapt is what lets Scrum teams be so fast and efficient.
Okay, this has been a great overview of the basics of Scrum. Now let's get into some of the real-world challenges of actually using these ideas and how to overcome them.
Sounds good. Let's do it.
Okay, so I'm starting to get the mechanics of Scrum, but actually putting it into practice in a company that's not used to this way of working. I mean, that can't be easy, right?
Yeah.
What are some of those real-world challenges Joe Justice talks about?
Well, one of the biggest things he mentions is pushback from, those traditional managers. They're used to that top-down style of leadership. Scrum, though, needs a whole different mindset, one where decisions are made more collaboratively and teams can kind of organize themselves. That could be tough for some managers to get used to.
Yeah, I can imagine. It's about trusting the team, right? Letting go of some of that control.
Exactly. And it also means changing how work is prioritized and managed. Justice talks about dealing with all these stakeholders who want different things, and it's hard to decide what's most important when everything seems urgent.
That's a problem in lots of companies, even those that aren't using Scrum. So how does Scrum help with that?
Scrum emphasizes having a clear vision for the product and a, prioritized list of tasks. The product owner, working with those stakeholders, is the one who decides what to build and when. This helps everyone understand what's important and make sure the team is working on the most valuable stuff first.
So it's like creating a roadmap, not just putting out fires all the time.
Right. And it's also about embracing the idea of building things step by step. Instead of trying to make the perfect product all at once, Scrum encourages teams to build in small increments. They get feedback, they make changes along the way. This lets them be more flexible and responsive to new needs or changing priorities.
That makes sense. It's like acknowledging you don't have all the answers right away and being willing to adjust as you learn more.
Exactly. And that brings us to another challenge Justice brings up, dealing with sunk costs. In the old way of doing projects, people are often hesitant to abandon a project, even if it's not working, because they've already put so much time and money into it.
Oh, yeah, I've seen that happen a lot. People get attached to their projects and don't want to admit defeat, even when it's obvious things aren't going well.
Scrum encourages a more practical approach, because you're building things in stages. Teams can look at their progress regularly and decide whether to keep going, change direction, or even just scrap the project altogether. That can be tough for some people, especially those who are used to seeing projects through no matter what.
So it's about cutting your losses, right? Not throwing good money after bad.
Exactly. It needs a change in mindset, seeing failure not as something bad, but as a chance to learn something.
That's a key part of Agile, isn't it? Embracing failure, using it to learn and grow. But that's easier said than done in a lot of companies.
It is, yeah. And that's why Justice talks about creating a culture of psychological safety on Scrum teams. That means an environment where people feel comfortable taking risks, trying new things, and sharing their ideas without being judged or, punished.
So it's about creating a safe space to learn and grow.
Exactly, yeah. It's also about celebrating those small wins. Justice talks about recognizing the team's accomplishments, even if they seem, small. This helps to keep things moving and keeps morale up, especially when the team's facing challenges.
Okay, so we've talked about some of the obstacles to implementing Scrum, but what about the actual process of switching to a Scrum framework? Like, how do you actually do that? What advice does Justice give?
He's big on starting small and, iterating. Instead of trying to change the entire company at once, he suggests starting with a pilot project, maybe just one team, and then slowly expanding from there.
So it's about dipping your toes in the water, right? Building momentum gradually instead of trying to do a complete makeover overnight.
Right. And it's about getting everyone involved. Change is always easier when people feel like they're a part of it. Justice suggests talking to stakeholders early on, being clear about what Scrum is supposed to achieve and letting people ask questions and voice their concerns.
So it's about building buy-in from the beginning, right? Not just forcing Scrum on everyone.
Exactly. And it's about being patient.
Huh?
Change takes time and there will be bumps in the road. You got to be ready for setbacks, learn from your mistakes, and keep adjusting your approach based on what you learn.
It sounds like making Scrum work is as much about managing people and company culture as it is about the actual processes and tools.
Absolutely. And that brings us back to that happiness metric retrospective we talked about earlier. Justice thinks happy teams are more productive, more creative, and more resilient, and that measuring and improving team happiness is essential for getting things done quickly.
Okay, let's talk more about that. What exactly is a happiness metric retrospective and how does it actually work?
It's a pretty simple but effective way to figure out how the team is feeling and what might be bringing them down. It usually involves a short survey, or a team discussion where people can anonymously share their thoughts and feelings about their work environment, their workload, their relationships with colleagues, things like that, anything that might be affecting their mood.
So it's like checking the team's emotional temperature.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And the important thing is not to just collect the data, but to actually use it. Take that feedback and figure out what needs to be improved, whether it's adjusting workloads, clarifying who's responsible for what, or even just creating a more supportive and collaborative environment.
It's about making those little tweaks that can have a big impact on how the team works together.
Right. And it's not a one-time thing, it's ongoing. Check in with your team regularly, listen to what they have to say, and be willing to try different things to find what works best for your situation.
It seems like the happiness metric retrospective is as much about building trust and communication as it is about specific tools or, techniques.
Absolutely. It shows the team that you care about how they're feeling, and that creates a sense of psychological safety, which is so important for creativity, innovation, and high performance.
So much of what we've talked about today comes back to giving teams a sense of ownership and empowering them, right?
You got it. At its core, Scrum is about giving the people who are doing the work the power to make decisions, trusting them to solve problems and come up with the best solutions.
That requires a lot of trust, which can be hard for some organizations.
It's definitely a cultural shift, yeah.
Yeah.
But it can lead to some amazing things. When people feel empowered, they're more likely to be engaged, motivated, and really committed to the team's success.
And that brings us back to speed, right? It's not just about working faster. It's about creating an environment where teams can move quickly and efficiently
Right.
because they're, all on the same page, they're empowered, and they actually enjoy their work.
Exactly. Speed is something that happens naturally when a Scrum team is working well. It comes from clear goals, good communication, and a shared sense of purpose.
So as we're wrapping up this deep dive, what's like the one big takeaway you'd want to leave our listeners with?
If you're interested in Scrum and what it can do, I'd say approach it with a sense of curiosity and a willingness to experiment. Don't be afraid to start small, try things out, and see what works for you and your team.
It's all about having that agile mindset, right? Being adaptable, iterative, and always open to learning and improving.
Exactly. And remember, it's not about achieving some perfect end state. Scrum is a journey, a constant process of learning and growing for both individuals and for organizations.
Okay, I think that's a great place to leave things for now. This has been a really insightful discussion. I feel like we've really gotten into the nitty-gritty of Scrum and Agile in a way that's, thought-provoking and practical.
It's been great talking about this with you. Really enjoyed it.
And to you, our listener, we hope this deep dive has given you a better understanding of the power of Scrum and Agile.
Remember, it's not just about working differently, it's about thinking differently.
Thanks for joining us on the deep dive. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep pushing the limits of what's possible. So a lot of what we've been talking about, it really comes down to a big change in how we think about work and teams. It's kind of like a whole new philosophy almost.
Yeah, I think you're right. It challenges a lot of those old ideas about how companies should work But those new perspectives, they can lead to some pretty amazing things.
I'm thinking about those examples like Tesla, Toyota, building those jets in 3 weeks. It's clear that companies are seeing the value in this across all kinds of industries.
And it's not just for big companies either. These ideas, they work at any level, startups, nonprofits, even just personal projects.
That's what's so cool about it, right? It's a framework that can help anyone, any team, to be more effective, adapt better, and be more successful, whatever they're doing.
And happier too, which is something Justice keeps bringing up. He really believes that finding ways to measure and improve team happiness is a big part of being successful in the long run.
We've mentioned that happiness metric retrospective a few times, but can we break that down a bit more? How can people actually use that?
It starts with realizing that happy teams, they're not just a fluffy extra, they actually make a difference. When people feel appreciated, supported, and like they're part of something, they're going to bring their A game, work well together, and come up with better ideas.
Yeah, that makes sense. But how do you actually measure something like happiness, It's so subjective.
There are a few ways, but one simple thing Justice suggests is a regular check-in. It could be a short survey or just a quick discussion where people can share anonymously, How are they feeling about the work, the team, the overall vibe?
So taking the team's emotional temperature.
Exactly. And the important thing is not just to get that info, but to do something with it. Use that feedback to see where you can improve, whether it's the workload, who's doing what, or just creating more ways for people to connect and work together better.
It's about making those small changes that add up to a big difference in how the team works.
Right. And it's not a one and done thing. It's got to be ongoing. Keep checking in with your team, hear what they're saying, and be open to trying different things to find what works best for you.
Seems like this happiness metric thing, it's as much about trust and communication as it is about, using specific tools.
Oh, absolutely. It shows the team that you genuinely care how they feel, and that builds that psychological safety, which is so important for creativity, innovation, high performance, all of that.
It seems that a lot of what we've talked about today comes back to this idea of giving teams ownership and letting them make decisions.
Yeah, that's a big part of it. Scrum, when you get down to it, is about shifting that decision-making power to the people actually doing the work, trusting them to figure things out and find the best solutions.
But that takes trust, right? And that can be a hard thing for some companies to do.
It is, yeah. It's a big change in the way things are done, but it can really pay off. When people feel like they have a say, they're more likely to be engaged, motivated, and invested in the team's success.
And that brings us back to speed, doesn't it? It's not about rushing. It's about creating that environment where teams can move fast because they're aligned, empowered, and actually energized by the work.
Exactly. Speed, it's like a natural outcome when a Scrum team is humming along,
Yeah.
So what happens when you have clear goals, good communication, and everyone's working towards the same thing?
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one key takeaway you'd want to leave our listeners with?
Well, if Scrum's got you curious, and you see the potential, I'd say just dive in with that curiosity and be willing to experiment. Don't be afraid to start small. See what works for you and your team.
Yeah, embrace that agile mindset, right?
Yep.
Be adaptable, keep iterating, and always be open to learning and, getting better.
Exactly. And remember, it's not about reaching some perfect endpoint. Scrum is a journey, It's about constantly learning and growing for both individuals and for the whole organization.
Well said. And to our listener, we hope this deep dive has sparked some ideas and, maybe inspired you to think about how Scrum and Agile can help you reach your goals, whatever those goals might be.
It's not just about working differently, it's about thinking differently.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep pushing the limits of what's possible.
See you next time on the Facilitators Deep Dive Podcast, your podcast on your way to facilitation mastery. Until next time.
See you then.